Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Jenkins. So, because of our change in schedule with the building being closed and all, I wasn't able to answer your questions in person. So, me being who I am, here is a brief, and I mean brief little video to answer the questions that you asked. And actually, some of them were really, really good. So, I'm excited that you asked them. I'm happy to answer them. So, just a quick reminder, this will not be on any upcoming exam. This is just for your information. So here we go. I've selected some of the questions and I got through most of them. Is protein or fat harder to break down? Because I know we said that the easiest macronutrient to break down, carbs. Carbs are the easiest. Fat and protein are more difficult. If we compare fat and protein, guess what? Protein's the winner. It has to do with that nitrogen. So protein, out of all of them, is the most complicated to break down. Another question, how long does it take for the body to build muscle? It's a really hard question to answer because the building of muscle requires so many ingredients, and it's a multi-step process, of course. So I wanted to give you the basics. So remember, the fancy term for building muscle is muscle protein synthesis. Synthesis means to build. So if we look at after an exercise session, this is an example of when muscle protein synthesis will go up. So after we do an exercise session, because of hormone signalers, what's telling the muscle when to build, when to break down would be hormones, things like testosterone, but not just that. Growth hormone, insulin-like growth factor, insulin, cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine. There's a lot. So based off of hormonal signaling, after an exercise session, the muscle will begin slowly to increase the process of building muscle back to repair any damaged muscle fibers and rebuild. Interesting to note, the peak rate of muscle protein synthesis tends to be within an hour or two. So the actual process of rebuilding that muscle after an exercise session can peak at about 1 to 2 hours. So that's an example of how we can bring protein down to the muscle and rebuild it. But of course, it's happening kind of all of the time. This process after an exercise session may continue for about 24 hours plus. So it's important that we give the body and the muscles the right amount of protein, but also the right amount of glucose. We need energy to do this process. It's important that we rest from exercise. Work hard when it's time to work hard. Rest when it's time to rest. One of the other questions was, how much protein is too much protein? Again, there's not one specific answer. The current thinking seems to be 3.5 to 4 grams per kilo body weight. That seems to be the upper limit of what is safe and effective. We talked about 1.4 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. This is going to satisfy 99.9% of us. The people that are hawking 3 grams of protein, 4 grams of protein per kilo body weight, way too much, way too much. The body can't break it down and use it that quickly, and therefore you're taxing other systems to try and break down the excess. There were many questions about sources of protein. Is there a best protein source? Animal versus dairy protein sources versus supplement. Does it matter if it's liquid or solid? So I wanted to give a brief word about protein sources. I'm going to be handing out in person a handout with some examples. But just to give you some information, if I was going to ask the best protein sources, you'd want them to be, technically, by the letter of the law, complete proteins. A complete protein is a protein source that naturally, natural is always best, that naturally contains all 9 essential amino acids. And guess what? A lot of our protein sources contain all 9 essential amino acids. Many, almost all of your meat sources, even fish, a lot of our dairy, soy, like tofu, guess what? They're all complete proteins. So it's not really that difficult to get good sources of protein. Within that, isn't it best to have variation? So having ground beef only 5 days a week, you're not going to get the most variation. While it may have all 9 essential amino acids, it may have different levels of each, and it's going to have different other vitamins and minerals, so it's best to have variety. An incomplete protein is one that doesn't have all 9. Does that mean that it's bad? No. Peanut butter, a lot of vegetable sources, beans, peas. So the question about animal versus vegetable, animal, even if it's seafood, animal is more likely to be a complete protein. Vegetable is more likely to be an incomplete protein. Doesn't mean that it's bad. Variety, variety, variety. There are some other things. There's something called a limiting amino acid, which means typically in all of these, which one seems to be present in the least amount, or the one that's usually missing in an incomplete protein. That tends to be lysine, methionine, threonine, or tryptophan. You don't have to know those, but just extra. These are the ones that tend to be missing to make it an incomplete. Animal, plant, seafood, it's best to get them all. Okay. Let's see. Liquid or solid? I think you want to be natural. That would be my answer to that question. It's not quite like carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, we can benefit with quick energy with a liquid source because that's what's going to be broken down even faster when we need energy. But protein, we don't use for energy a lot. So I don't think it matters so much, liquid versus solid. I think what matters more is that we get a variety, including many complete proteins. Variety, variety, variety. And these are mostly going to be solid. Natural and variety. There was a question about whey versus casein protein. So whey is a mixture of proteins that are formed naturally by cheese production. Casein is the main protein part of milk. So they have some similarities, some differences. I included this because I really like it. So this talks about the amino acid profile, and I even give you the reference from where I got it from. This gives you the amino acid profile of many different types of protein and protein supplements. So you can already see in the red is whey protein isolate. But this also, the reason why I included it is that because it includes casein. You're never going to have to know all these numbers, but we can compare. If we just compare whey to casein, overall, which has higher numbers of each of the essential amino acids? It's going to be whey. So if we just compare dollar for dollar here, the whey tends to have higher amounts. Not all. Look, casein has more phenylalanine. But if we look at most of them, whey is going to have more. They're both complete protein sources. They both have a pretty high amount. We would want to look more specifically at leucine because that's what's closest in structure to our skeletal muscle. Which has more leucine? Whey. So compared to each other, whey would be a better complete protein. Is casein a bad complete protein? No. There's other things to consider, digestibility and taste and personal preference. But in terms of amino acid content, they're both complete proteins and they're both pretty good. Whey's a little bit better. All right. And then the last question I had didn't seem to show up here, but that's okay. I can make it work. The last question I want to address, well, actually, before we do that, there was one more question. Let me tease it. There was one more question about what is the derivation of the word protein? And actually, I didn't know this, so I had to look it up. And it's kind of cool. So I will address that in a moment. But before I do that, I always like to have scientific peer-reviewed journal information to back up what I'm saying. So that's why I included this graph for you to show you something that's peer-reviewed. But also, we were talking about how much protein is too much. That was one of the questions. How much protein is too much? And I happened upon this really interesting, at least to me, peer-reviewed article. And this talks about the tolerable upper intake level of leucine. So of all the branched-chain essential amino acids, which one is most important? Leucine. And this was trying to find the tolerable upper intake level, which we already know from earlier in this course. So I thought it was interesting. I highlighted some interesting information. You don't need to know this. The upper limit for leucine in healthy adult men is usually, based on this article, suggested to be 500 milligrams per day. Oh, wait a minute. 500 milligrams per kilo per day. 500 milligrams per kilo per day, which comes out to be, for an average male, 35 grams per day. So I just like to have some numbers. If we think back to the lab where we tested the branched-chain amino acid powder, it had 500 milligrams of leucine. So this had some other interesting information. It gives you some background. Some amino acids have specific metabolic functions. So I just wanted to show you, it's not, like I said, in order to build muscle, not only do we need the raw amino acid for building, we need the building material, but we also need other amino acids that are going to help. So other amino acids are going to be used as chemical signalers. Other amino acids are used to form hormones. Didn't I say that hormones are dictating the process? So we need a lot of amino acids, not just to build the muscle, but to support and be signalers for that muscle building. What else did I highlight here? Look, therefore, dietary supplementation with specific amino acids in excess of the requirement may have adverse effects, which of course we've been talking about. Some other information. They talked about branched-chain amino acids specifically. Earlier reports have summarized studies of branched-chain amino acid supplementation, and they said up to about 15 to 60 grams total did not result in adverse outcomes. So it recommended here, just for leucine, 35, but we want to talk about all the branched-chain amino acids. So leucine, isoleucine, and valine, maybe as much as 60. But what's the upper limit above that? There's some other interesting information. As I've been trying to get across to you, bringing in more of something isn't always better. So what they found is if you bring in more than about 50 milligrams per day, you reach a plateau of leucine. More than 50 milligrams per day, you reach a plateau of where bringing in more no longer will have better effects. All right. Okay, so I just wanted to show you some of that information. Their conclusion was, based on their results, about 35 grams per day of leucine. Up to 50, you may reach the upper limit. but 35 is a good recommendation. Okay, last thing real quick. And this was cool. Derivation of the word protein. I didn't know. So I did a little search myself. I found this article, folks. Sometimes it's so cool to go back. Look at this article from the Journal of the American Medical Association. That's what JAMA is, Journal of the American Medical Association. This is from 1950, and I got it right from little old Hudson Valley Community College, our library listserv. So this was an article from 1950, Journal of the American Medical Association. The term protein was introduced, Dutch agricultural chemist Mulder, 1838. That's pretty boss, isn't it? So, according to this guy, the word protein was derived from the Greek proteos. Proteos, apparently, in Greek means first rank or first position. So, they believe the derivation of protein from proteos is because it's first rank or position. The primary element in animal nutrition that prepare us. So if you read a little further, of the three principal organic constituents of living matter, proteins are most important because they have the most biological functions. So we know that we need all three, carbs, fat, and protein. Protein has the most varied functions, so therefore they named it based off first rank. It makes up the most of us, about 20% of our body weight is protein, and it has the most important functions according to them. All right, there you go, folks. Any questions, as always, let me know.